Hi there, my name's Susan Thomas, and I'm happy to be here supporting the Academic Alliance of South Carolina. And we're going to talk a little bit today about one of my very favorite interventions to work on reading fluency called repeated readings. And there's several different variations of this. I'm going to talk about a few today. There are also several other interventions for fluency, but this is the one we're going to talk about to focus on today. Just a little bit about the Academic Alliance, if you're not familiar. We're housed at the University of South Carolina, and the mission of the Academic Alliance is to research and disseminate evidence-based practices to inform, implement, and sustain an integrated academic and behavioral framework. And basically, the mission is to make sure that educators, teachers, and related service providers have a place to find those evidence-based practices and support network to work together to improve outcomes for students with disabilities. And one of the things we will do is be providing training to be available to you, but also to be working with districts and providing consultation to build the capacity of the district and state level implementers. And so there'll be different opportunities for training, and you can look forward to that. We're quite new, and so we hope that you will begin to follow us, and we are going to be looking for your involvement and networking with us because we learn from each other. Today, we're going to talk very quickly about repeated reading, something that you can put in place in your classroom. You have a Google folder with some things in it, and then this presentation will be in there along with some links to some helpful websites that give you some more information that you can take a look at. So when we start thinking about repeated readings, we're really starting to think about fluency. And we know that fluency is one of the 5 big ideas of reading. It's one of the pieces that weaves together to make a successful reader. And of course, the goal of a reading fluency intervention when we do it is, first of all, to increase the child's fluency so that they are accurate and they're reading without errors. They have an appropriate pace. I've seen some kids think they're supposed to be speed reading and you can't even understand them and they have no clue what they've read. That's not fluent reading. And also that they have appropriate expression, including intonation and phrasing, so that they are, we can understand and we have meaning. And the ultimate goal is we want to improve reading comprehension. So when students are fluent readers and they can decode and read with automaticity, then they spend their time being able to process meaning rather than on trying to figure out the words and getting bogged down in that. And so that's how this will correlate to good comprehension. It increases their knowledge of the very content that we need them to know for school and information that they need for living life. And most importantly, this is important so that they are college and career ready. Remember, we start working on college and career readiness skills the moment students enter school. So what is a repeated reading? It's just what it sounds like. Students read the same short passage 3 to 4 times. They set kind of goals for rate and accuracy for the reading fluency of that passage so that each time they can see some improvement, and they're practicing their reading skills. So I like to talk about this just like, you know, when we think about practicing sports, or I took piano and I played the same things over and over again so that I would get better at them. Repeated reading is the same thing. It's the same concept, that if we practice something and become more proficient, we get better and better, and then we change up what we do. So it does have, why would you want to consider repeated reading? Well, remember that fluent reading is essential for building strong comprehension skills. So we want interventions that work. Remember that fluency, and I like this quote, has been defined as reasonably accurate reading at an appropriate rate with suitable expression that leads to accurate and deep comprehension and motivation to read. I really like the end of that statement, because when students can do it and they are fluent, they're more motivated to want to do it. And then repeated reading is a promising practice on the What Works House Clearinghouse. It showed particularly growth for students in improving their reading comprehension. It has a long body of research, but we want to try to use evidence-based practices that we know can benefit students. And I'll just add in the other thing, it's very easy to implement, and I'm all about easy implementation. So who needs repeated reading? Students who are struggling with fluency, but students must have the following skills to be able to benefit from repeated reading that we're going to talk about today. They need to be able to rapidly identify their letter sounds, know regular and irregular words, and read basic sentences. So for what we're going to talk about today, that's going to be something they have to be able to do. They need to be able to read at least 20 words per minute, and they have to read with greater than 95% accuracy on or at a below grade level text. So if you're working with a student below grade level, they need to be at 95% of whatever grade level they're reading from. So anytime you have a child struggling with fluency, and remember, fluency, if they're struggling with comprehension, we want to check their fluency, because if their fluency is not where it needs to be, and there are norms to look at that, then we want to work with the fluency first. If they're fluent readers and their comprehension is not where it needs to be, then we would look at comprehension interventions. And we'll be providing some training on some good easy comprehension interventions. So what does a fluent reader look like? They rely primarily on the letters in the word rather than context or pictures. They process every letter, and we actually know this from the neuroscience now, that this is what readers do. They use letter sound correspondences to identify their words. They can decode those words, and they have that strategy for doing it. And they are automatic. Now they're automatic. So they've done all those things, but it's so automatic. So when we think about fluent readers and building those fluent readers, that's what we're trying to increase and have them practice. So let's get started. So you're going to need some materials. You'll need reading passages. You'll want some timers. You'll want graph paper, and you'll want pencils. You're going to want to select your reading passages. And when you select your reading passage, I'm going to give you some places you can get them, but you can also select them from all kinds of places. When I first started with doing repeated readings, we didn't have all the things we have now, and I used graded text. So select reading passages that the student can read with about 95% accuracy. Select high interest passages, particularly for students who are struggling. And then select short passages with anywhere from 150 to 400 words, depending on the level of the student. So here's some websites. ReadWorks has some free leveled materials that you can get. Intervention Central has an oral reading fluency passage generator where you can take passages and put it in, and it'll kind of tell you the level, and you can create some short passages. Easy CBM, you can use the progress monitoring probes if you're not using that for progress monitoring for your students. But that's a great place. So if, let's just say you're using AimsWeb for progress monitoring, your district is using that, you could actually use the Easy CBM passages. But we don't want kids reading those passages ahead of time when we're using it to progress monitor, because those should be cold reads. Same thing with Dibbles. If it's not being used for progress monitoring, you can download all of their probes for free. If you go to that website, it's done by grade level. And so you're going to find that reading passage. You probably know of even more than I do, places where you can get different leveled and lexiled passages. And then you're going to want students to kind of keep account of what they do for their 3 to 4 readings when they read. Intervention Central has a chart dog that you can use to create a graph. That I like this, that the National Center for I think it's Educational Statistics, has a kids space where you can create graphs. I use just good old-fashioned graph paper and bar charts. I had kids design their own because they were keeping it up. You can certainly let them use Excel. They can record it in there and do a graph. So one of the things that's great about this is not only are they practicing their reading sentence skills, but when they're recording their results, they're actually, you can embed some other skills like how do you graph progress, all of those things. So you're going to want to make sure that you have a way to do that. So when you conduct the repeated reading activity, the student gets the passage, and you time them for 1 minute, marking their errors. And you count the number of words read correctly in 1 minute. And so if they read 50 words and they made 5 errors, then it would be 45 words in a minute read correctly. And then you will set a target for the 4 readings to read 30% more than at the first read. And so you want to make sure, 30% more than at the first read. So kind of by the end of that reading, they're going to increase their number of words that they've read per minute. And then you have the student read the passage while someone listens to them read. You're going to use error correction with them, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. And then they count their words and graph it like we talked about earlier. So they've got a goal for that week. And I say that week because I used to do mine by week for students. So once again, they read, you count their words read correctly, they graph it. That's the bottom line. When a student makes an error, quickly correct them, stop them, correct it, give them the word, have them repeat, have them start the sentence over. Yes, it slows their time down, but then you're having them practice that word and they'll pick it up the next time. So we do correct errors during that reading time in repeated reading. So there's lots of different ways to use repeated reading. And certainly it's a great tool for paras to be able to use. If you have volunteers that are coming in to be reading buddies, this is a great thing to have them do, because a lot of times you don't have all that time to do this. You can certainly do it with your students, but you're pretty busy progress monitoring. And so having some volunteers, I've had some places where older students, we actually train them to be able to come and do that. Teacher cadet, if in one year I had, there was a service learning project at our middle school. They were coming down to our elementary school for service learning, and I trained some of those students to do this, and worked out great. It's a great homework alternative. So rather than sending home and saying, please read for 20 minutes, which for a child who has reading problems is like torture sometimes, sending home these short passages and asking parents to read it every night and graph it with their child as part of their homework, great practice, easy for somebody to put in place, doesn't take too long. We have busy lives, our parents work hard, and so that's something that's so doable. Certainly, there are ways that this has been incorporated with peers, and there are guidelines in this document. It's an older document, but the guidelines are still good. Right here, if you click on that, Beth Harn and David Chard a number of years ago wrote a document, and they've got great guidelines for how peers can do this with each other and how you set up those peer groups. One way that some teachers have used repeated reading is through co-reading with the teacher. And so the teacher reads the passage, a co-read first while the students watch, and then the student reads with the teacher, and then the students read by themselves together. And that's just an alternative that you could do sometime if you wanted to work and have something a little bit differently. And then there's some small group repeated reading interventions that you can do for students. And there's some directions on Intervention Central about how you can set it up in small groups. The great thing about repeated reading is there are a lot of different options for the way you do it. I've used it a lot with homework. Being something meaningful that I knew my parents could quickly help with. And also you heard me say I've used it with volunteers that were in the building. So how you use it is all up to you. The main idea is that students are practicing the same passage 3 to 4 times. I did 4. And so that they become more proficient and that they're charting their growth for that particular passage. So they're starting to watch themselves get better. And that's a great thing. It instills motivation. It's engaging for the student. Just a few helpful hints. You're going to always be progress monitoring reading through the use of curriculum-based measurements to see those long-term benefits. Make sure you're celebrating success with students when they're doing that. You want to provide students with the rationale for repeated reading, that the reason they're doing it is because we practice to get better, and reading is a skill that we have to practice. Involve students in goal setting and working to improve. This is something we want for our college and career ready students, that they know how to set goals for something that they need to do. So it's a great idea. And if you ask volunteers or parents, you're going to need to make sure that you provide a training. So you could do a little short video for parents on here's what this looks like, and help parents to know exactly what they need to do and how to provide correction and how to count up the words. Those are all easy things. One of the things you'll notice in all the resources is that there's some things that you could just use with parents to help them with repeated reading. So I hope those hints help you a little bit as you get started with this strategy. Here's some references and resources for you. This one here, this right here, the Educator Science of Reading Toolbox, is from our National Center for Literacy, and it's a great, got a great piece for you on helping to implement this. And then finally, repeated reading is a strategy for instruction in the area of literacy. We are all about promoting that at the Academic Alliance. We share things pretty regularly on social media as we're getting started. So be sure and follow us. We're on Facebook. That should be Facebook, not Facebooks. On Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. I want to thank you for joining me today. And just to learn all about repeated reading. And I look forward to seeing you again in some of our other things that we'll be doing. We'll be having some trainings and some networking opportunities virtually. And so I hope you have a great time and keep on reading.